Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. I've talked a lot recently how I'm a huge fan of T-bills. They're offering competitive rates on cash. And if you're looking for a place to park your cash, keep it safe, earn a decent return, perhaps you're interested in exploring T-bills. And if you're interested in exploring T-bills, this video is for you. I'm gonna try and put everything you could possibly wanna know about T-bills in this video. Treasury bills or T-bills are issued by the US federal government. They're short-term debt instruments. Essentially, you're lending money to the government. Many people, myself included, look at T-bills as being essentially risk-free because they're backed by the full faith and creditworthiness of the US government, and the US government has never defaulted on its debts. Now, I know there have been some comments expressing concern about the US hitting its debt ceiling, and does that make these investments more risky? In my personal opinion, they're still incredibly safe. They're still essentially risk-free. You have to keep in mind, this is not the first time the US has hit its debt ceiling. Since 1960, the debt ceiling has been raised 78 times. And if the US starts defaulting on its debts, we're gonna have much bigger issues than our personal cash reserves. The other thing to note is that the purchase limits on Treasury bills is incredibly high. $10 million. So odds are you're probably not going to be maxing out on these. And that's a good thing because we all have different amounts of cash that we want to keep on hand. Some people want to keep just a couple $1,000s. Other people want to keep maybe 2 years of cash or cash-like equivalents. So T-bills can provide a variety of solutions to a variety of people. T-bills are short-term securities. They're offered in increments of 4, 8, 13, 17, 26, and 52 weeks. These term lengths are essentially the lockup period for the T-bill, and new T-bills are issued each and every week. The 4, 8, and 17-week T-bills are issued on Tuesdays. The 13 and 26-week T-bills are issued on Thursdays, and the 52-week T-bills, they're issued monthly. So that means you have a lot of opportunities to buy T-bills. If you didn't buy them last week, you can go ahead and buy them this week. But keep in mind, you do have to place your order prior to the auction. The Treasury does have a list of all tentatively scheduled auctions for these T-bills. I will link that down below if you're at all interested. As I mentioned, T-bills go through an auction process, and it's this auction process that ends up setting the price and the subsequent interest rate for these T-bills. So that means when you actually place your order for a T-bill, you don't know the exact price you're going to pay for this T-bill, and you don't know the exact interest rate that you're going to get. But you aren't necessarily flying blind, because it's fairly safe to assume that new issues will be in the ballpark of the recent issues. So you can just look at the rates on the recent issues. One thing worth noting, when you look at the rates, you will likely see two numbers. Here it's called the high rate and the investment rate. Alternatively, it might be called the bank discount and the coupon equivalent. The high rate or the bank discount, that's used in the auction process and doesn't really apply to you as an investor. The investment rate or the coupon equivalent, that's the interest rate you're going to receive as an investor. That's the one you want to pay attention to. When you go to buy a T-bill, you actually purchase the bill at a discount of face value. So let's say you place an order to buy a $1,000 T-bill. That's not actually the price you pay. Let's throw some easy numbers into the mix. Let's say you bought a 52-week T-bill with a par value or a face value of $1,000. What you would actually pay might be $950. Then when the T-bill reaches maturity, you would get $1,000 back. Your principal plus the $50 in interest. The important thing to keep in mind is that the interest is paid on T-bills at maturity. There is no installment payments of interest. So you get what you lent the government, the principal plus interest at maturity. So if you buy a 4-week T-bill, once those 4 weeks go by, you'll get what you lent the government, your principal, plus any interest. Or you buy a 52-week T-bill. Once that 52-week T-bill matures, once it reaches maturity, only then would you get your principal plus your interest back. You have to wait the full 52 weeks. It's also important to note that the stated interest rate is always an annual rate, regardless of the term length of the T-bill. The most recent 4-week T-bill has an interest rate of 4.683. If we took this interest rate and divided it by 365 days, the number of days in a year, we would get this number. That is our interest per day. So if you take a 28-day time frame or 4 weeks, that T-bill would pay a total of about 36 cents in interest on a $100 T-bill, or $3.60 on a $1,000 T-bill. Now, about the auction. The auction and the pricing of these T-bills is among banks and financial institutions. When you place an order for these T-bills, you're not participating in the auction. Rather, you're placing what is called a non-competitive bid. You simply accept whatever the outcome is of this auction. T-bills are exempt from state and local taxes, but they are subject to taxes at the federal level. If you look at it this way, that's definitely a perk, and it makes the interest rates on these more favorable than, say, a high-yield savings account or a CD, because the interest on those accounts is not exempt from state or local taxes. Now, it is important to note that every state and local municipality has their own tax rate, so it's best to look into your own unique circumstances. Now, because in a way these T-bills are already somewhat tax advantaged, I personally don't like to purchase them within a Roth. If I'm putting investments in my Roth, I generally want those to be ones that don't already have some level of tax advantage treatment. That way I get the greatest benefit and the greatest use of my Roth. However, everyone's situation is different. Finance is personal, remember that. So if you decide to put T-bills in your Roth, just know that in that situation, they would also be exempt from federal taxes. Primarily, there are 3 ways you can purchase T-bills. You can purchase them directly through the Treasury's own website, treasurydirect.gov, through a bank or a brokerage house, think Fidelity or Vanguard. Now, the interest rate you get will be the same at each institution, so it really just comes down to personal preference. Now, there are pros and cons depending on where you buy. If you go with Treasury Direct, you can actually purchase in smaller denominations starting at $100. And you have access to a greater number of upcoming auctions. I like having access to a lot of upcoming auctions. It allows me to create a plan with my money. But keep in mind, if you buy through Treasury Direct, that money is essentially locked up, aka you can't access it until that T-bill matures. Theoretically, you could sell your T-bills early, but it's a cumbersome process. Physical paperwork, snail mail, and the processing time exceeds 3 months. So if you bought a T-bill on the shorter end of the spectrum, it's just not gonna happen. If you purchase through a brokerage house, maybe that's easier. Maybe you already have an account with a brokerage house, and this just sort of consolidates everything. Well, just know if you go that route, generally they have higher purchase limits, so you generally have to start around $1,000 rather than $100. And also it is easier, and you could sell these T-bills early if you wanted to, generally just the click of a button. But I say this very cautiously because selling T-bills early is really the only time you can lose money on a T-bill, especially in a rising interest rate environment like what we're currently in. If newer issued T-bills have a more favorable rate, the one you're trying to sell might be less desirable if its rate is lower. So you might have to sell it at a discount, aka less than what you paid for it, so you could really lose money. And also, when you get involved in the secondary market, there's a middleman, and this can involve extra fees. So in this situation, I just like to think of T-bills as being locked up until they reach maturity, which is essentially true for me anyway because I purchase through Treasury Direct. I like to purchase there because when I send money to my brokerage account, I like that money to not be sitting in cash, but rather be invested in the stock market. I like to keep my cash elsewhere, not in my brokerage. But again, this really comes down to personal preference. The other thing to note is that when you purchase through a brokerage house, it comes with more limitations. If I log into my Vanguard account and I wanted to place a T-bill order, I only have access to 4 and 8-week T-bills right now. The window in which you can purchase T-bills is only a couple days, those couple days prior to the auction. If I wanted to buy, say, a 52-week T-bill, that's not possible right now. That wouldn't be possible for another 2 weeks, at which point I would have to remember to log back into my brokerage account in those couple day windows where I could place that order. Alternatively, I could just go to Treasury Direct today and set that order to happen because through Treasury Direct, I already have access to this auction. No, it wouldn't be executed for another 2 weeks, but I could place my order today. Remember, no matter where you purchase, you get the same interest rate. So there's no better, there's no worse, it's just personal preference. If you'd like to build a T-bill ladder, you can certainly do that and take advantage of what are hopefully rising interest rates. There are a handful of ways to build a ladder. You could simply start right off the bat by buying a bunch of T-bills with different maturity dates, say 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 17 weeks, 26 weeks. Or you could stagger those maturity dates, start by going 4 weeks, 17 weeks, 26 weeks, then have them set to automatically reinvest. This option is available with Treasury Direct as well as banks and brokerages. If you select the auto reinvest, once they mature, they'll roll right into the next available T-bill with that same term duration. Ultimately, you can build whatever type of ladder using whatever type of intervals you would like. Just make it work for your situation. So that is the video on T-bills. I hope it answered any questions you may have. If you have some others, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.